It's time for you to relax. So make yourself comfortable, however that looks for you. And if you would like to, gently close your eyes. I'm speaking to you today about healing the silent disconnection of family you've always felt but never named. And I'm going to speak to you today in a way that's designed to nourish the unconscious part of your mind, the part of you that doesn't need to think in words, the part that knows how to heal, how to let go, how to grow, the part where change begins, not through force but through understanding. You're gaining wisdom whilst you rest. If at any point you're distracted by sounds, thoughts, sensations, there's no need to resist. Simply notice it and let it go. Allow yourself to return again to this moment, softly, easily, calmly. You can relax just as you do in those quiet moments before sleep, or when your mind drifts off in a daydream, like lying on a boat floating down a slow river beneath a warm sky, like those moments in meditation or in the depth of a gentle hypnosis. That's where we're going today. You've already been there before. Now you'll return with more purpose. And as we journey through this session together, I'll guide you with words. But the real work, the deep, quiet shifts, will happen in you, silently, naturally. At the end, you'll know this session is complete because you'll hear a song. The song reflects the journey we've taken together. You're welcome to stay and listen. And when the music ends, that will be your signal to open your eyes, to return, to re-enter your world, gently renewed and wiser. But for now, relax. 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 Have you ever sat in a meeting, nodding while someone blatantly underdelivers, and somehow you walk away feeling guilty for even noticing? You start questioning your expectations, minimizing your frustration, rehearsing how to be constructive so you don't seem ungrateful, even when you're the one paying the bill, signing the contract, or carrying the fallout. This isn't about communication. It's about conditioning and manipulation. And I'm going to show you subtle tactics, ones most people already use daily, whether they realize it or not. And if you're not, you're about to find out why you should. There's a particular kind of pain that comes from knowing something isn't working, but staying quiet because you were trained to protect other people's comfort at the cost of your own. And that training doesn't come from nowhere. It's wired into your nervous system. Your breath shortens, your jaw tightens, your focus scatters. Not because you don't know what's wrong, but because you do. And you're already preloading the emotional tax of having to say something. You're playing chess with yourself before you even make a move. You talk yourself out of asking for accountability. You excuse poor judgment. You rationalize underperformance. And slowly, invisibly, you become the one who absorbs all the pressure so no one else has to feel it. That's self-erasure in a corporate dress code. And the worst part is, everyone else feels fine. They believe their excuses. They trust their own version. But you're the one left holding the chaos, wearing a smile, pretending it's just a rough patch. Now, I'll count from 5 down to 0 as we explore this more. It will become lighter and lighter. And with each number, allow yourself to drift a little, more settled, more still. 5, sinking into the surface beneath you. 4, your shoulders softening, your breath slowing. 3, your thoughts becoming quieter, less important. 2, every part of you safe, present, calm. 1, deeply relaxed. And 0, just be here now. Here's the reframe. You thought you were being kind, but really you were being emotionally manipulated into managing someone else's consequences. And because it looked polite on the surface, you thought it was professionalism. Number. It was powerlessness disguised as patience. You didn't lose your voice. You were never taught how to use it without being punished. You've been tiptoeing through professional landmines trying to protect people who don't even know there's a war. But now you see it. Now you know. And the only question left is, how long have you been normalizing this, thinking it was just the cost of being good? Before you ever questioned your boundaries, you were taught to ignore them. Maybe not in words, but in every praise-heavy silence that followed when you smiled through discomfort, said yes too quickly, or cleaned up messes that weren't yours. School told you to be a team player. Church told you to be humble. Social media told you to be relatable, not real. And your family, if they struggled emotionally or financially, probably taught you to manage your impact. Be low maintenance. Be easy. Don't add to the stress. And somewhere in all of that messaging, you learned the golden rule that kept you safe. Don't make people uncomfortable. That was the first manipulation tactic you mastered on yourself. Before you could ever wield it outward, it was turned inward. You became skilled at suppressing your needs, dressing your fear as flexibility, and offering empathy in places you desperately needed boundaries. Because back then, silence kept the peace. Compliance kept the connection. Eventually, you didn't need anyone to tell you to shrink. You started doing it automatically. You volunteered before being asked. You paid invoices without checking the work. You covered for people who didn't even realize they'd failed you. You built an entire identity around being capable, accommodating, and kind, but never powerful. Because power, in your world, had teeth. And the worst thing you could be was difficult. That's how the system trained you, slowly, repetitively, with just enough praise to keep you loyal and just enough punishment to keep you quiet. Spicy truth. You became so good at hiding your needs, even you forgot where you put them. Here's the metaphor to remember. What you call self-sabotage might actually be obedience to an outdated survival script, one that kept you safe once, but now keeps you small. And now that you're aware of it, you can feel the friction, the misfit, the subtle ache of outgrowing a story that never belonged to you in the first place. So ask yourself this: were you really struggling, or were you just following a script that was never yours to begin with? If this is something you want to change, keep listening, because staying nice comes with a price, and you've already been paying it in silence. It starts with tension you don't notice until someone points it out. The tight jaw, the hunched shoulders, the breath that never makes it to your belly. You lie in bed scrolling for peace you can't feel. You snap at the kettle when it's too loud. Your body starts holding the emotions you never let escape. Fatigue isn't just tired anymore, it's fused with resentment. And not toward others, toward yourself. Because deep down, you know you've let too much slide. You've covered too many shifts, literal or emotional, and taken the hit for people who never knew you were bleeding. Your sleep's light. Your digestion's off. You keep forgetting things mid-thought. Your confidence doesn't leave you all at once. It dissolves. In micro-decisions. In backspaced sentences. In apologies you didn't owe. And then come the whispers. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this. Why can't I just get it together? You question your leadership, your intelligence, your edge, when really you've just been running a high-performance life on suppressed emotion and blind loyalty. You've made exhaustion look like efficiency, and silence look like professionalism. And when someone finally crosses a line, you blame yourself for not setting it sooner. That's how deep the pattern runs. That's what happens when you don't learn to use strategic influence, when you refuse to wield the very manipulation tactics that everyone else already is. You don't rise above the game. You get swallowed by it. Rhetorical gut punch. How much longer are you willing to perform competence while slowly losing access to your own conviction? Your coping mechanisms aren't coping, they're just unpaid interns trying to run your entire emotional life on vibes and caffeine. You thought you were just being understanding, accommodating, reasonable, but what you were really doing was disappearing, quietly, internally, daily. Let's pause for a moment here, in this space of rest, and turn our attention inward, away from the theories and the concepts, and into the quiet felt sense of your own being. Notice the weight of your body where it meets the chair or the floor. Feel the subtle rhythm of your breath entering and leaving your body. Now, I want you to bring a gentle awareness to the places that feel held, tight, the specific geography of your tension. Perhaps it's a faint ache in the base of your skull, a perpetual readiness in your jaw, even now as you rest. Maybe it's the familiar armor across your shoulders, or a dull weight sitting heavy in the center of your chest. We often dismiss these sensations as mere stress, the inevitable wear and tear of a modern life. But what if they are something far more precise? What if they are not just symptoms, but a story, a living, breathing archive of every time you were subtly manipulated into compliance and, more importantly, every time you manipulated yourself into silence for the sake of peace? The renowned neuroscientist Bessel van der Kolk gave us the language for this with his powerful axiom: the body keeps the score. It remembers what the mind conveniently forgets or rationalizes away. Your mind might recall a difficult meeting as a bit challenging, but your body remembers the exact somatic signature of the moment you swallowed your truth. That tightness in your throat, it's not random. It is the ghost of the sentence you bit back. the opinion you softened into a question, the word no that you dissolved into a sigh. Your jaw clenches not because you grind your teeth at night, but because it has become the guardian at the gate, holding back the torrent of words you deemed too sharp, too real, too inconvenient for the room. Your diaphragm, that beautiful fan-shaped muscle of breath and voice, lies tight and restricted. Why? Because it has been trained to stifle your authentic response, to keep your breath shallow so your voice can't gather the power to project a conviction that might cause a ripple. And your gut, that enteric nervous system often called the second brain, it churns with the unsaid. It absorbs the emotional residue of every interaction where you chose appeasement over integrity. This is the profound, hidden cost. You have been unconsciously manipulating your own body into a state of perpetual vigilance and appeasement. You have asked it to armor bear for other people's comfort, to metabolize their dissonance, to physically embody the lie that everything is fine when it is not. You called this professionalism. You called it being a team player. You called it kindness. But your body knows its true name. It is captivity. It is a quiet, cellular rebellion against the self-betrayal it is forced to enact every single day. So, as you rest here now, send your breath as a messenger of liberation to those places. Let the inhalation be a question. Where are you holding the score? And let the exhalation be a promise. I am listening now. Your job is no longer to carry this burden. Your job is to be the home for my voice, not its prison. Feel the subtle, perhaps almost imperceptible softening that follows. That is the sound of a body beginning to trust that it no longer has to fight the battles of the past. It is the first gentle step towards somatic sovereignty. Daniel was one of those men who made stress look like structure. Sharp suits, clear speech. He ran a consultancy firm that thrived off results, and clients trusted him, not because he chased them, but because he didn't need to. He was competent, professional, steady. From the outside, he looked like someone who had boundaries, but the reality was more brittle than bold. He outsourced his marketing to a specialist agency, recommended by a peer, backed by testimonials, and trusted them without hovering. He wanted to be the kind of leader who believed in people. But as months passed with fewer leads and recycled excuses, something in him started to fracture. There was always a reason: the holidays, the algorithm, the market. He didn't want to be that guy, the one who micromanaged or assumed incompetence. So he waited. He softened. He absorbed. And the cost piled up quietly. One morning, reviewing his ad spend versus conversions, he realized he'd blown 5 figures on faith. He didn't yell, didn't rage. He just sat still in front of the screen and whispered to himself, "I've been manipulated by my own reluctance to confront." That was the shift. Not anger, clarity. He fired the agency a week later, not dramatically, just cleanly. And in the silence that followed, he noticed something strange. He didn't feel triumphant. He just felt clean. No victory lap. Just the quiet satisfaction of having reclaimed authority over something he'd been pretending wasn't broken. It stung, because it exposed the deeper truth. Daniel had built a business that ran on data, but relationships that ran on denial. He made a private decision that week. From now on, he'd start with standards, not stories. And if the numbers didn't align, the narrative wouldn't be enough. Not because he was cold, but because he was finally done being accommodating at his own expense. Spicy line? He wasn't too trusting, he was just emotionally allergic to confrontation and calling it professionalism. The real twist? Daniel hadn't just failed to lead others, he'd failed to manipulate them, ethically, clearly, strategically, because he was too afraid of how power might distort him. And now he was learning that power, when used consciously, doesn't corrupt. It clarifies. As you settle into this moment of rest, allow your mind to wander into the subtle architecture of influence. Consider the word manipulation. It feels heavy, dark, a thing done by villains in shadows. But what if we were to see it not as a monstrous aberration, but as a current, a constant, flowing river in which we all swim? To understand how to use it, we must first understand how it has already used us. For the most profound manipulations are not the ones we fight against, but the ones we welcome, the ones we mistake for our own choice, and even for trust itself. Begin by feeling the rhythm of your breath, the beat of your heart. This body, this mind, believes itself to be an autonomous fortress. And yet, from the moment you awoke today, a symphony of unseen influences began. The specific brand of toothpaste you reached for, its minty freshness a cue not just for cleanliness, but for a specific corporate promise. The route you took to work, perhaps guided by an algorithm that calculated efficiency, silently shaping your experience of the city. These are not accidents. They are the result of a vast and intricate science of compliance. The philosopher Byung-Chul Han speaks of our time as the psychopolitical age, where power operates not through brute force, but through the seductive language of freedom and choice. You may, it whispers. Would you like to? It invites us to optimize ourselves, to consume, to share, to like. This is the manipulation of marketing, which neuroscientists like Antonio Damasio have shown bypasses our slow, logical prefrontal cortex to speak directly to the emotional, decision-making centers of our brain. A nostalgic jingle, a carefully chosen color palette, the scent of baking bread in a supermarket. These are not arguments. They are emotional keys that turn the lock of our behavior without our conscious permission. And then there is the deeper, more ancient magic, social compliance. Think of the last time you stood in an elevator, instinctively turning to face the doors like everyone else. This is the power of social proof, a heuristic our brains use to conserve energy. The psychologist Robert Cialdini mapped these territories of influence, documenting how we are wired to return favors, to obey authority figures in lab coats, to desire what is scarce. We do this not out of weakness, but out of a deeply ingrained social contract that once ensured our survival in tribes. To go along was to belong. To trust the group was to be safe. And herein lies the great, beautiful, and terrifying sleight of hand. This constant, low-grade manipulation leads to a slow, almost imperceptible disconnection from our own agency. We outsource our decisions. We follow the digital breadcrumbs left by our past behaviors and the behaviors of millions like us. We begin to conflate this smooth, frictionless path of least resistance with a feeling of ease and well-being. And we give that feeling a very specific name. We call it trust. We say, I trust this brand. I trust this platform to show me what I want to see. I trust that everyone is doing this, so it must be right. But this is not trust in its true relational sense. This is a manufactured consensus. It is the comfort of the current carrying us, and we mistake the absence of struggle for a sign that we are swimming in the right direction. We surrender our agency and experience the surrender as relaxation. We trade our sovereignty for convenience and call it trust. But what if, upon realizing this, we do not succumb to cynicism or paralysis? What if, instead, we choose to awaken? To learn the language of these currents is to finally learn how to navigate them. To study the principles of influence is not to become a villain, but to become a conscious participant in the dance of human interaction. It is to reclaim your agency. This is where your journey from passive subject to empowered individual begins. You can develop your own tactics, not for exploitation, but for navigation and effective expression. Ethical manipulation is simply the art of persuasive communication aligned with mutual benefit. It is framing your brilliant idea in a way that resonates with your audience's values, Cialdini's principle of liking. It is creating a compelling vision of a project's success that makes the hard work feel meaningful, a nod to the power of storytelling. It is understanding the rhythms of another's communication to create harmony and rapport. And yes, perhaps there are times to dance on the fringes, to understand that all human interaction contains a subtle negotiation of wills is to be truly awake, to strategically choose when to disclose information, to artfully frame a request, to use the principles of scarcity or authority to advocate for a worthy cause or for your own deserved advancement. This is not evil, it is agency. It is the conscious application of the very forces that once acted upon you unconsciously. It is using the master's tools to not only dismantle the master's house, but to build your own. The goal is not to become a puppeteer controlling others, but to finally see the strings that have been attached to you, and with gentle, deliberate hands, begin to untie them. To move from being an instrument played by your environment to being the composer of your own life's melody. This is the path to becoming a more empowered and free individual. It is a wisdom that does not distrust everything, but that sees influence clearly, and in seeing it, is finally free to choose its response. So rest now, but rest with this new awareness. Feel the currents of the world, not as a threat, but as a medium you are learning to move through with intention. Your agency is not lost. It is waiting to be reclaimed, one conscious choice at a time. And that reclamation begins in moments of deep rest, like this one, where the noise of influence fades, and the quiet voice of your own will can finally be heard. If you want real change, listen to the next section, because this is the part where the story gets less romantic and more real. There's a moment, and maybe this is yours, where the anger stops pointing outwards. You stop obsessing over what they did wrong and start noticing all the places where you let it slide. You realize it's not about blame, it's about authority. And authority doesn't come from shouting louder. It comes from no longer waiting for someone else to fix it. That's what radical responsibility is. It's not punishment. It's liberation. It's the moment you say, I didn't cause all this pain, but I'm the one who's going to stop it from happening again. And when you say it, something lifts. Not all the pain, not all the fear, but the fog. Suddenly things get sharper. You remember the invoice you sent with full rates, the boundary you set that didn't wobble, the time you paused before saying yes and didn't talk yourself out of it. Those were wins, quiet ones, but they counted. And then the pivot, because just when you think you've cracked the code, it turns. What if responsibility isn't the finish line? It's just the start of the fight. What if the moment you take the wheel is the moment you realize you've never looked at the map? Now you're not just confronting others, you're confronting yourself, your habits, your hesitations, your attachment to being the good one. And that's the part no one warns you about. That the freedom you want, it requires becoming someone your old self wouldn't recognize. And every day you hesitate, your old identity roots itself deeper. That voice in your head gets more convincing, more permanent. Maybe this is just who I am. Nope, that's not insight. That's the echo of fear. Spicy line? Responsibility isn't self-help. It's spiritual CrossFit. You don't get lighter, you get stronger. And it hurts before it helps. So if you thought this was going to be about gentle empowerment, surprise, it's about pressure, precision, and power. You're not being rescued, you're being rebuilt. To truly understand the silent pull of the crowd, we must travel back to the damp cobblestones of 19th century Copenhagen, where a solitary philosopher, Søren Kierkegaard, penned a warning that echoes with terrifying prescience in our modern age. He saw a new force emerging, not one of overt tyranny, but of something far more subtle and insidious, the crowd, or what he also called the public. And he declared with unflinching clarity that the crowd is untruth. Let's breathe into that statement. The crowd is untruth. Kierkegaard did not mean that the people in it are inherently liars or evil. His meaning was far more profound and far more personal. He meant that the moment an individual dissolves into the crowd, they surrender their most sacred responsibility, the duty to be a single, authentic self. In the crowd, no one is truly accountable. Criticism is diffused, opinion is diluted, and action is deferred. The crowd speaks in a vague, anonymous voice of "they say" or "everyone thinks." A chorus with no singular face to hold responsible. It creates a comforting, numbing fog where one can hide from the exhilarating and terrifying weight of one's own choices. Now, feel this in your own life. That meeting where you nodded in agreement while your intuition screamed in dissent, that was you merging with the crowd. The time you scrolled through social media and felt a pang of anxiety that your life didn't measure up to the curated highlight reels of others. That was the crowd's whisper, setting the terms of what matters. The brand you bought, the opinion you quietly adopted, the silence you kept to avoid being difficult. These are not your own choices. They are the choices of the crowd, and you are the anonymous vessel through which they are enacted. The crowd manipulates you with the oldest and most powerful bait, the promise of belonging. And in return, you manipulate yourself, performing a borrowed identity so convincingly you even start to believe it's your own. Kierkegaard's antidote to this was not a call to arrogant individualism or isolation. It was a call to something he termed the single individual. This is the person courageous enough to stand apart from the crowd, not in defiance for its own sake, but in deep, earnest responsibility for their own existence. This is the leap toward authentic life. It is a terrifying leap because the crowd will inevitably retaliate. It will call you arrogant, difficult, weird, or cold. It will withdraw the very validation it taught you to crave. This is its primary manipulation tactic, the threat of exile. But Kierkegaard would argue that the person who fears this exile is already exiled from themselves. The journey to ethical influence, to wielding your own agency with power and grace, begins with this conscious uncoupling from the crowd. It means pausing in the moment of pressure and asking not, what does everyone else expect, but what is true for me? What aligns with my own inner compass? This is the highest form of influence because it is rooted in integrity, not imitation. It is not about winning the crowd's approval, but about becoming so grounded in your own values that your very presence becomes a quiet, gravitational force. Your words carry weight because they are yours alone. Your actions have power because they are deliberate, not derived. You are no longer whispering with the crowd. You are speaking from your own sovereign heart. And in a world of echoes, an authentic voice, however quiet, is the most powerful influence of all. Machiavelli didn't teach people to be cruel. He taught them to stop pretending that kindness alone builds security. He saw the truth most of us are too polite to say. Power isn't handed to the best communicator, the most honest voice, or the one with the cleanest conscience. Power goes to the one who understands how perception moves people and uses it. That's where manipulation lives. Not in lies, in leverage. But if you've spent your life avoiding power because it felt dishonest, here's what actually happened. You got manipulated first. You were taught to fear strategy, conditioned to believe that influence equals harm, told that the only moral path was submission. So instead of learning how to frame, guide, or direct outcomes, you learned how to tolerate them. That's not virtue. That's the blueprint of emotional obedience. Enter NLP, a system that teaches people not how to lie, but how to speak in ways the brain can't ignore. How to shift someone from defense to curiosity, from no to tell me more. NLP is manipulation done with ethics and elegance, and when you pair that with the neuroscience of human behavior, something clicks. You realize you weren't too weak to lead. You were never trained to use language that generates trust and action. And here's the punchline. Your nervous system has been wired for safety, not strategy. You weren't lazy. You were conserving energy in emotional war zones. You weren't indecisive. You were scanning for threat before asking for anything. You tried to think your way out of it, but your brain wasn't waiting for logic. It was waiting for safety. So ask yourself, what if the habits you've been trying to fix were never flaws? They were loyalty to a version of you that didn't know how to hold power. What if you never learned to influence others because you were too busy surviving them? Spicy blind spot? You thought you couldn't change, but deep down, you were terrified of who you might become if you did. And here's the most confronting truth. You thought you just didn't try hard enough. But what if it was never about effort? What if someone taught you to lose? Look, There's a reason manipulation gets a bad rap. Because it works. And because most people don't realize they're already using it. Just badly. Listen further, because the tactics I'm recommending aren't about deception, they're about influence with awareness. And the framework behind it, Alfred Adler nailed it a century ago. Every human is walking around with a quiet inferiority complex. We crave significance, control, a sense that we matter. And when we don't get it, we manipulate, clumsily, unconsciously, desperately. Adler taught that behind every behavior is a goal of belonging or superiority. Manipulation then becomes a shortcut, a psychological bridge between powerlessness and perceived control. You beg, flatter, guilt, charm, stonewall. Not because you're evil, but because you're scared of being irrelevant. And when those tactics work, you confuse the win for worth. Boom, there it is. That's how people end up repeating the same patterns, because manipulation soothes the ache even if it doesn't heal the root. But here's the kicker. Most people only manipulate to survive. You're learning to manipulate to lead. That's the ethical difference. And your brain has been primed for this. Every time you watched a parent withhold affection, a boss use praise strategically, or a teacher weaponize silence, you were absorbing the unspoken rules of psychological leverage. You just didn't have the language for it. You thought your niceness was a virtue, but it was just your tactic, an unconscious script to avoid rejection. And that script has consequences, because in the absence of power, you performed agreeability. And now, you're done with that charade. What if your morality has been manipulated? What if everything you were taught about being good was really about being controllable? This isn't about becoming a villain. It's about no longer playing the victim while pretending to be virtuous. Welcome to the code beneath your conditioning. If this is something you want to change, keep going with me, because the insight was the easy part. Now comes the part where you actually do something with it. And at first, it's clumsy. You say no, but your voice trembles. You speak up, but it comes out awkward. You start to reword an email and catch yourself deleting the boundary you just wrote. But you leave it in. You let it send. And that tiny act feels bigger than anyone will ever know. Your brain screams, what if they get upset? And someone does. Maybe it's your manager. Maybe it's your client. Maybe it's someone you thought would understand. They push back. Ask if everything's okay. They say, you're not like yourself. What they mean is, you're not convenient anymore. Boom, that stings. You spiral. The guilt kicks in. You stare at the message you sent and wonder, should I just fix this? You almost do, but then pause, breathe, recommit. Not because it's easy, but because you finally remember what the cost was when you didn't. And you realize something brutal. The system was never neutral. You thought the goal was to be liked, but the real rule was to be quiet. And no one told you that's what you were being rewarded for. So now, every time you speak with precision, every time you name what you want instead of hinting around it, you are breaking a pattern that never served you, but kept you small enough to stay safe. Turns out growing a backbone gives you backache before it gives you peace. But your posture is changing. Slowly, elegantly, intentionally. You walk into rooms you used to shrink inside. You say less, but mean more. And even when your heart races, you don't flinch. You manipulate with integrity. You lead with leverage. You're no longer trying to survive the game. You're learning how to play it with strategy, with soul, and with stakes. But there's still a voice that whispers, what if people don't like this new version of you? What if you don't? That's the edge you're standing on now. Not everything's healed. Not everything's known. The next move? That's yours. You've got the insight. Now, you need the edge, so stick around since that's coming. Because theory without embodiment is just intellectual lubrication. And this is where it gets messy. You're about to try a tactic that feels wrong at first, like saying less in a conversation just to let someone sweat in the silence, or delaying your reply to make your time mean something. The first time you do it, your body will scream, "This is manipulative." But what it really means is, this is new. And power always feels foreign to the disempowered. So you'll try again. You'll phrase something more sharply than usual. You'll watch their face twitch. You'll hold your boundary instead of rushing in to fix their discomfort. And someone will not like it. They'll tell you you've changed, that you're cold now, that you used to be nicer, and for a second, you'll believe them. You'll almost crawl back to the version of yourself they preferred, the softer one, the more controllable one. But you'll stop, take a breath, and decide that you're not performing obedience anymore. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. You were never rewarded for being kind. You were rewarded for being compliant. The system was never neutral. And when you break the spell, it bites back. What if manipulation has always been around you, but you were the only one playing by the rules? And what if now you're not breaking rules, you're just writing your own? Here it is. Turns out tactical silence is louder than over-explaining and cheaper than therapy. You're not a monster for wanting influence. You're a human waking up to the emotional economy you live inside. Let's journey now from the body into the deeper architecture of the mind, to a concept that lies at the very heart of your sense of power and powerlessness. It's a quiet, internal compass that guides every reaction, every decision, every story you tell yourself about why things happen the way they do. Psychologist Julian Rotter called this your locus of control, the place, the locus from which you believe the control over your life originates. When you are the subject of constant unconscious manipulation, from the curated perfection of social media to the strategic scarcity of a limited time offer, from the subtle guilt of a parent's sigh to the implied threat in a manager's passive-aggressive email, a profound and silent shift occurs. You are systematically trained to believe that the helm of your life is not under your own hands. You begin to feel like a paper boat on a vast ocean, tossed by waves of other people's agendas, economic currents, and algorithmic storms. Your successes can feel like fleeting moments of good luck, a favorable wind that quickly dies down. Your failures feel like inevitable tides pulling you out to a sea of circumstance. This is what it means to have an external locus of control. The power is always out there, with them, with the system, with fate. You hear its language in your own thoughts, in the stories we all tell. My boss makes me feel so small. This client is impossible and is stressing me out. The algorithm just won't show my work to the right people. I just have bad luck with relationships. This is not a character flaw. It is the logical outcome of a world that profits from your sense of external control. It is the water you've been swimming in, and it's designed to make you feel like you cannot swim against the current. But here, in this space of awakening, we recognize that this external locus is the greatest manipulation of all. It is the master switch that keeps you compliant, hesitant, and looking outward for permission that will never come. It has you seeking validation from the very systems that require your doubt to function. The journey to ethical influence, to true personal power, is the conscious and deliberate shift from an external to an internal locus of control. This is not about developing a grandiose ego or believing you control the weather. It is a far more subtle and profound recalibration. It is the realization that while you cannot control the wind, you can always, always learn to adjust your sails. It is moving from the passive language of, "this is happening to me," to the empowered language of, "this is happening, and now I choose my response." So now we arrive at the crucial bridge between insight and action. Understanding the mechanisms of manipulation is one thing, but wielding influence without becoming the villain in your own story is another. How do you navigate this delicate terrain? How do you ensure that your newfound power is a tool for liberation, not a weapon of coercion? The fear of becoming what you despise is a powerful deterrent, often keeping you paralyzed in passivity. Let's dissolve that fear with a simple, sturdy compass, a litmus test you can carry within you, a quiet checklist to consult in the moment of choice. This is your framework for ethical influence, built on 3 pillars. Before you act, before you speak, before you deploy a strategy, pause and ask yourself these 3 questions. First and foremost, is it transparent? Could I comfortably explain my tactic to the person I'm using it with after the fact without feeling shame or deceit? Transparency is not about announcing your every move like a chess player. It's about operating with the integrity that could withstand the light of day. For instance, if you are consciously framing your proposal to align with your client's deeply held value of sustainability, you could later say, "I knew environmental impact was a core priority for your company, so I focused my presentation on how this solution reduces waste." That is transparent influence. It's strategic empathy. If the thought of explaining your actions makes you squirm, if it requires hiding your true intent in shadows, then you have veered from influence into manipulation. Transparency ensures your power is clean. The second question, is it empowering? Does this interaction ultimately leave the other person feeling stronger, more capable, and respected, or does it leave them diminished, obligated, or tricked? Ethical influence is not a zero-sum game where you win and they lose. It is a rising tide designed to lift all boats. Are you helping them see their own needs more clearly? Are you giving them a graceful way to say yes to something that truly benefits them? For example, using the principle of scarcity ethically, we have one spot left for a client who is truly ready to transform their results, can feel exciting and exclusive, directing energy toward a valuable opportunity, using it unethically. If you don't sign right now, this price disappears forever, creates panic and pressure designed to bypass their rational judgment. One empowers by highlighting value, the other manipulates by exploiting fear. And the third, most personal question. Is it aligned? Does this action feel like an authentic expression of my core values and my true self? Or does it feel like I'm putting on a mask, playing a role that contradicts who I am at my essence? This is your internal barometer. Your body will tell you. That clench in your gut, that tightness in your chest, that is often your integrity protesting. Alignment means your strategy is in harmony with your character. You might be choosing your words carefully, but you are not betraying your truth. You are not morphing into a cutthroat salesperson if you are by nature a compassionate guide. You are finding a way to be a more persuasive, more effective, compassionate guide. If an action requires you to contort your fundamental values, the personal cost of that win will always be too high. Hold this compass: transparency, empowerment, alignment. Let it be your guide. It does not promise ease, but it does promise integrity. It allows you to dance on the fringes of ethics, not as a predator, but as a conscious artist of human interaction, wielding your influence with wisdom, grace, and a clean heart. This shift is the birthplace of all agency. It is the moment you stop waiting for the world to give you a sign and instead become the author of your own intentions. The internal locus understands that a difficult client is not an imposition, but a test of your boundaries and communication skills. It sees a failed project not as a verdict on your worth, but as a data-rich lesson in what to refine. It recognizes that while you cannot control another person's reaction, you have absolute sovereignty over your own boundaries, your own standards, and the energy you choose to bring into a room. This is the core of ethical manipulation, the reclaiming of your internal locus. It is the understanding that influence does not begin with controlling others, but with mastering your own internal state. From this unshakable internal ground, your actions, your persuasive language, your strategic framing, your conscious use of principle no longer come from a place of lack or desperation, but from a place of centered, intentional power. You are no longer a paper boat on the ocean. You are the navigator, charting your course with a compass you finally remember was in your hand all along. But be warned, once you start seeing these moves in action, you'll also see who benefits from your passivity. That chapter, still unwritten, and something tells me it's going to change everything. You're not here for approval anymore. You're here for alignment, for clarity, for the clean, quiet power that comes from knowing you're no longer afraid to shape outcomes. You don't need to beg for respect. You're building it with precision, with presence, with language. You don't manipulate people to get your way. So yes, this is manipulation, and yes, I am recommending it. But if it helps you sleep at night, call it influence. You influence them because you finally understand that staying silent wasn't kindness, it was erasure. You've stopped apologizing for being sharp. You've stopped asking if your standards are too high. And that voice inside, the one that used to plead for softness, is now the one holding the line. You're not perfect, you're strategic, and that's better, because perfection is a mask. Strategy, that's a muscle. You're learning how to use it. You've evolved before, you've rebuilt, you've walked through fire. But this time, you're doing it awake, without waiting for permission, without softening the edges. What if the story isn't over, just unfolding? Who would you be without the shame? Write it in the comments. I choose my strength, not their approval. Next time we'll go deeper into the language that seduces trust, the tactics that cloak power, the moves you've seen in others but never dared to name. What you've seen so far, just the scaffolding. Now we build. And if you're still watching, you're not casual. You're not scrolling. You're not just curious. You're one of the few who actually wants to know how power works, how people move, how belief bends. That means you don't belong in the motivational fluff. You belong here with the thinkers, the disruptors, the ones who are done being emotionally obedient. You've found the last honest place on the internet, and it's not gentle, but it's real. I'm Gemma Bailey. I've trained elite coaches, rewired belief systems, and sat with clients through breakthroughs most people wouldn't survive. I'm not here for content. I'm here for change. And if you've made it this far, you are too.
I sat in the meeting, nodding my head. They underdelivered, I doubted instead. I questioned my standards, I softened the blow. Practiced my kindness so no one would know. But the weight on my chest isn't patience, it's pain. A script in my body that whispers the same. Keep quiet, keep small, don't rattle the chain. Protect their comfort and swallow the blame. I was trained to erase, smile while I'm breaking, keep saving face. Calling it kind, but it's camouflage scars. Professional silence behind prison bars. This isn't maturity, this is disguise. Powerlessness dressed up as nice little lies. School said be a team, church said be meek, family said don't add stress when they're weak. I learned to obey before I could speak, to turn down my fire and call it unique. But the praise and the punishments carved me this way, rewarded my silence, ensured I'd obey. Now I see through the mask, I can feel the decay. The cost of being good is too high to pay. I was trained to erase, smile while I'm breaking, keep saving face. Calling it kind, but it's camouflage scars. Professional silence behind prison bars. This isn't maturity, this is disguise. Powerlessness dressed up as nice little lies. What you call sabotage is survival's refrain. Old scripts in my bones, outdated chains. But I see it now, the story's not mine. I won't keep on shrinking to keep you just fine. The tight jaw, the sleepless nights, the scrolling for comfort under blue lights. The body remembers the words I don't say. resentment collecting in silence each day. I was trained to raise, smile while I'm breaking, keep saving face. But the cost of this silence